Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Ellie Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome to the In Search for More podcast. I'm here with Joey Cohen.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. The founder and CEO of 40 Pillars. Before we go into what you do and why we're here, I want to talk about how we met. We hosted a conversation. The In Search of More podcast hosted a conversation called The Truth About Ketamine. It was a live webinar, which we eventually posted on podcast form. And about 2 or so months later, I was introduced to you by Dvorah Kamen, who was one of the panelists on that podcast. And she had told me there was this gentleman named Joey Cohen. Well, why don't you pick it up from here? Tell us what happened.
So I was listening while you were live with Dr. Radowitz and Dvorah Kamen. I actually called Neshama. I'm like, wow, this sounds good. I need this for healing purposes. So I called him and scheduled an appointment.
Awesome.
And I was in there within 2 or 3 weeks.
When you say you needed this, what did you felt you? What spoke to you on the podcast that said, I need this?
I don't remember the exact conversations from the podcast, but I do remember conversations around trauma and just stuff being trapped in our body and how that impacts our behaviors and how ketamine has helped people with PTSD, for example. It's something that, I discovered through working with a therapist, a trauma therapist. That's something that I do have from my childhood.
Awesome. So one of the things we were talking about before we went live here was what you feel is a stigma around psychedelics.
Yes.
Speak on that.
Yeah, the reason why I'm doing this interview with you, and I did a documentary a few months ago on psychedelics, is because I do feel there is a stigma around psychedelics, especially in certain communities. And I wanted to destigmatize that. I want to be part of a group that is destigmatizing psychedelics, because once there's not a stigma around it, more people are going to try it out. And once you try it out, there's going to be more opportunities for healing.
Were you part of the stigma at some point?
I would say, yeah, I was part of the stigma.
Well, before you before you began working with psychedelics, what was your feeling about it? Do you remember?
Because I never did drugs before, never got involved with drugs or alcohol or smoking growing up. I just thought people who did psychedelics were more, they're doing it for party reasons.
That was your association with it? And,
yeah.
And that's what you believe is still the stigma today?
Yes.
Including ketamine?
I guess, yeah. Because when I've shared my documentary with people, a lot of people called me and they said, yeah, I used to do ketamine in college. I used to snort it. Or I used to do it, I used to take it in different ways, but I did it with a doctor, with a nurse, in a professional setting, IV drop, with intentions for healing.
So what do you think the difference is between a healing experience and a party experience, the way you see it today?
What's the difference? The difference is...
Not the difference in the outcome, the difference in like the ingredients of the soup itself, like leading into the experience. What's the difference between...
The intentions?
Say ketamine being used as a party drug and ketamine being used as a healing medicine.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear on your question.
You had a healing experience with ketamine?
100%.
Okay. Someone else used ketamine in a party setting?
Yes.
They most likely did not have a healing experience.
No, they didn't. They had a bad experience.
Why not? What's the difference between the two?
One is the setting. The setting is very important. Number two, the intention, super important. My intention was to deal with past trauma, to overcome struggles that I dealt with in the past.
What happened in your life and what was going on that you said I needed something more than I was getting?
I would say, if I can go back to 2000, maybe a year and a half ago, I did a men's retreat, men's workshop, where it was focused on dealing with past trauma. And I had a breakthrough experience. I started crying at the retreat. I was in a circle surrounded by a group of men, and they asked me to, I was the guy in the middle, and they were asking me to share my story
Right.
from the beginning. And the leader asked everyone else to release sighs that feels natural for them, that's connected to my story, in terms of like compassionate, empathetic type sighs.
Meaning give you nonverbal feedback.
Nonverbal feedback.
Understood.
Like, so I actually started crying and getting emotional when I was sharing my story.
From the way they were reacting to it.
From the way they're reacting to it.
Got it.
And then the facilitator at some point said, what if that was your daughter?
Asking you that question. What if it was your daughter that went through your experience? Yeah. Can you take us into that? What was the experience? What are we talking about?
So I didn't really have compassion for myself. I couldn't be empathetic to myself from my own experiences. When I was in therapy, the therapist said, you have a pretty extraordinary background, crazy background. The way it started was, in a nutshell, I was born in Iran during the revolution. My father was killed during the revolution. My mom and I escaped. We ended up in the South in the United States.
Any siblings with you, or your mom and you?
No. No siblings from my biological father.
Got it.
She married someone from...
How old are you at this time when you escaped?
Like 2.
Okay.
Maybe 1.
Got it.
She married someone who is from the South to help us get out. He adopted me.
From the south of?
Like Mississippi.
Oh, from the South United States. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought we're still in Iran. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So it was very normal. For me, it was a very normal childhood.
In what sense?
We moved around every year, every 6 months. I was beaten every day with the paddle, with the switch.
By
my stepdad, people in the school, even a lot of verbal abuse. People in my family, there was definitely physical abuse, and at a certain point, skipping forward, we lived in California. My brother, Michael, half-brother, who came from this
Mississippi.
second marriage, Mississippi marriage.
Dad.
Mississippi dad. So it was me, my mom. My mom's from Iran. You know, she had a traumatic departure. She had her own...
A traumatic departure from Iran.
From Iran. And her own stuff that she never healed from or processed. And back then, therapy wasn't a thing. Right. And what we're talking about in this meeting wasn't a thing. So she never, even to this day, she thinks that, you know, healing and psychology is all BS. So she sent me away. We lived in California to live with another family because she couldn't take care of me in our little studio apartment. It was well-intentioned, but I was sent away at a young age, like maybe 10 years old.
Wow. Did you send your other siblings away, or?
Just me.
Just you. So the siblings she had with Mississippi dad stayed home?
It was only one sibling. Yeah. He stayed with her.
He stayed home, Michael.
Yeah. I ended up in Savannah, Georgia with this family. Decent family. The Andersons. And small town outside of Savannah, Georgia. And I remember, I guess I was maybe more around 11 years old. And I went to bed every night. And I was pulling my hair. And I didn't realize, in hindsight, I realized I probably had a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, probably.
And I was dealing with a lot of stuff. But on the surface, you know, I was going to school like a regular kid. Anyway, I ended up there for a year. got into a lot of trouble. My mom got some advice that I should probably go to military school.
Got it. When you say trouble?
Fights, get involved with the wrong guys. I went to some tough public schools. One of the schools that I went to in the South, in Savannah, Georgia. Kids brought guns and knives, and I literally had to fight for my life. So, my mom sent me to military school. And in military school, it was tough. I was attacked by skinheads. I got jumped into a gang.
They knew you were Jewish.
No, it wasn't because I was Jewish. I didn't identify as a Jew.
Understood.
I was actually raised Christian.
Interesting.
So I was baptized at 5 years old. I was told I didn't really have an identity. I was told that this guy was my father.
Mississippi dad.
Mississippi dad. I discovered later at 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, he wasn't my father. And we looked much different. But I was raised Christian, wore a cross around my neck. And so that wasn't a thing. But because I was from Iran, I was really dark. My mom's super dark. I got picked on. And they're very ignorant, especially 20, 30 years ago in the South. So I had some trouble with different groups of people there. It was a tough situation. There was attacks in the school, stabbings, riots. So I got into a lot of trouble. And
your mom did what?
I said I
She
can't
sent
be
you
here
to the
anymore.
military.
Yeah. I mean, she said I can't come back home. So I went to another military school and another, and ended up dropping out. The last grade I finished was 11th grade. Ended up homeless for 6 months. Living in the back of a truck and taking showers on the beach.
As a teenager.
16 years, 17. Was hanging around with the wrong guys. And eventually I said, you know what? This is going to lead me to jail or death. So I always had this dream to go to California. And I took a Greyhound bus to California. And I started fresh there. And my mom was still in LA from when we were younger. So I thought it was a good reason to go to Cali. Got a job there. And eventually, fast forward a little bit, saved up enough money to get a little car. Some guys asked me to give them a ride somewhere. I did. They ended up robbing someone. I think a drug dealer. I didn't see them again after that. 3 or 4 months later, I don't remember how many months later, they were caught. They did a lot of other crimes since then. So they tied me, these guys tied me to everything else to get a deal. And I kept my mouth shut because that's what I was taught growing up. Right. And I spent 7 months in county jail, LA, which was living hell. Is crazy.
7 months in county jail?
Yeah. Mainstream county jail. It was tough.
How old were you then?
Just turned 18.
Maybe more comfortable if you fix your shirt. So you're 18, spent 7 months in county jail?
Yeah. I got released to my lawyer was Jewish. He knew my background, my past, and he spoke to me about this place, a rehab called Beit Teshuvah.
Where is that?
In LA. So because it was the first time I was involved with the
When
law.
you say he knew your background, he understood
My
he
Jewish
understood that you
background.
were an Iranian Jew.
Yes. So they worked out some deal with the courts where I was released to Beit Teshuvah for a year.
Which is a Jewish rehab.
Which was a Jewish rehab. And that was the best
House
thing
of
that happened to me.
Repentance.
I'm sorry? House of Repentance,
House
yes.
of Repentance, yeah. House of Return. No.
House of Return. So I was involved with the 12-step program there. even though I wasn't addicted to anything. I didn't have an addiction.
Right.
I wasn't recovering from any substance, but um, it was great people there, and that's where I turned my life around.
So
Things really started changing.
So that was a turning point in your life.
Yes, big
Eventually,
time.
you go to school, you become a lawyer.
Graduated law school, went to college, got my GD because I
Pretty
dropped out
impressive
of
to go from homelessness at 16 years old to graduating
law school. Yeah.
And then from there, you go into HR consulting, assisting companies, leaders.
My first job out of law school was working for a guy named John Goldman doing business consulting, business coaching. So I kind of have been on that path of business coaching, performance coaching, some HR consulting. And I've worked with Fortune 500 companies, pro athletes, Navy SEALs.
Assisting executives, business coaches to improve their own performance.
Their personal lives, their professional life.
Awesome.
I believe it's all.
So the people aspect of business.
Yes.
Right. Making that better for companies.
Yes.
That's your primary vocation. That's what 40 Pillars does today.
Coaching and consulting, yes.
So one of the things that fascinated me about your story is that you've been on the, let's call it personal development path for almost 20 years.
Since 2005, yeah.
Almost 20 years.
Yeah. I got introduced to Tony Robbins in 2005. So that was the first.
Unleash the Power Within.
Just one of his CDs.
Oh, okay.
I just graduated college and someone gave me all of his CDs.
Awesome.
And that's where it started.
So that started the personal development path.
Yes.
But then something happened at this retreat you spoke about earlier that shifted your perspective. It's not just about performance. It's not just about developing ourselves. There's something more there's something more that's taking place inside of us that needs to be.
100%. So the therapist that I was working with before the retreat was telling me from an intellectual view that I had a lot to deal with. I had a lot of trauma that I need to deal with because I noticed that sometimes I would get triggered and my response emotionally was disproportionate. And I wasn't proud of that and I wanted to work on it. But it wasn't a somatic type healing. It wasn't a body type healing. It was just very intellectual. It wasn't going to my heart.
Right. So I want to focus on that for a second. So your therapist is hearing your story, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, anyone looking at it from the outside, a child born into a revolution, having to run away, dad dies, clearly has a stepfather who's not very receptive, on his own at 10 years old, homeless at 16, around gangs, violence, and everything else, would understand that this child had a lot of trauma.
My brother died when I was 18. He was murdered. There's a lot of other things. I'm just giving you 10% of the story.
Right. You said enough of the story to get a sense, right? That
Right.
anyone hears this story, says, hey, this child's had a lot of trauma. There's probably something.
Right. I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't have any trauma.
Really? So
I was
with all
in
of that-
denial.
but how could you be with that story? What was going? You're not in denial anymore, right?
I'm not in denial anymore, no.
Right. So what do you think was going through your head before that? And you're not talking about someone who's oblivious to these concepts. You're on the performance path, personal development. You're going to Tony Robbins seminars, but something about you says my life was normal enough.
I didn't want to be seen as a victim. I did not want to see myself as a victim. That's why. And the regular personal growth path puts a lot of focus on that. Seeing yourself as a victor, not a victim.
Right. So I can see how that viewpoint can really help someone get through your experiences and then in a very short time turn your life around the way you did. Because I don't want to see myself as a victim and not a victor. I don't want to see myself as a victim. I'm moving forward with my life. I'm a victim of no one or nothing. But now you don't see yourself as a victim. Or do you?
No, I don't.
So how did you get through that
I'm very blessed.
dilemma?
Not a victim. So the traditional personal growth path, like Tony Robbins and Jim Rohn and all the traditional names you know of, it can only take you so far. Another therapist that I worked with knew of this men's retreat. He referred me to it, and I think we spoke about it earlier. And that's where I had a really amazing experience. We did some breath work there, um, some carpet therapy. It was a great experience.
Can you speak about carpet therapy a little bit?
Can't speak too much about it because I don't know enough about it, but the from my limited understanding, it's when someone plays like the role of your, I guess, the person who attacked you
The
or hurt you,
antagonist in the story.
the antagonist. They play that role, and you're already in this mindset of doing breath work and doing other things that you're in a very vulnerable emotional place that they play that role.
Right. That breaks you out of the traditional thinking that you're in, the regular patterns of, I'm not a victim, so I'm not going to go there. Now we're in an emotional, vulnerable state. And then the truth that's sitting inside you can come out. Yeah. And what you found was the body stores a lot.
The body stores a lot. There's a big release, like the dam was broke.
Right. That was a aha moment for me in my own healing, where for a while we think everything is in the mind, and that, oh, it's a memory, and then I have to be okay with it, and I can tell myself it's fine. I can change my perspective on the situation, find the silver lining, and everything will be okay. And then eventually, we realized that this isn't about that. This is a flower that didn't get the right nutrients, didn't get the right water.
Right.
And stored inside its very cells is the dysfunction. And our mind can think whatever it wants. It's not going to change the fact that inside of us we didn't have the right nutrients. So we got to go in there and rip out the infected cells, the infection. What's there?
Well said.
So you found that as well through this retreat. So then you have this aha moment. Okay, I can think I'm not a victim. I can think whatever I want, but there's a reality. There's some stuff.
There's a reality.
There's
right.
some stuff stuck inside me that I need to get out.
Right.
After that experience, did you feel like you released all of it, or you felt like you had touched the tip of the iceberg?
Oh, just tip of the iceberg.
So where did you go from there?
Someone spoke to me about psychedelics and the benefits of it. It was the first time I was really introduced to it.
In a proper way, because
in a proper
obviously
way.
You've heard of...
I was part of the group that there's a stigma around it.
Correct.
I did some research, and I saw tons and tons of studies. I mean, it's endless studies on the benefits of psychedelics for veterans with PTSD and trauma. And I'm like, I finally acknowledge I'm a trauma survivor, whatever you want to call me. I'm not sure what the label is, but there's more work to do. And I was desperate for more, and I'm a seeker, and I'm like, I cannot actualize my potential right now. I'm stuck. I got to do more.
The retreat allows you to understand that there's a wealth of trauma stored inside you. Once you can acknowledge those experiences and the reality of that's living inside you, you say, okay, let me try psychedelics. Someone I trusted is telling me about this. Let me see where it takes me. You start doing the research, and
next thing you know, I'm doing something called 5-MeO.
It's
a psychedelic.
The toad.
The toad.
Famous toad.
And I videoed myself doing it. And it was like a 20-minute, 15-minute journey. And I was crying for half of it. My eyes were closed. I was pretty much unconscious.
Mike Tyson talks about his...
Mike Tyson. I saw the Mike Tyson and Tony Robbins video.
You had seen this before you did it?
Yeah, I did
As
the research.
part of your research.
It's part of my research.
You had seen what they were talking about.
And I was nervous.
For sure.
I was very nervous. When I was in the moment, there was so much fear that I didn't even let myself fully release.
Even under the 5-MeO?
Even under that.
You still had the fear?
I still had the fear.
But it released 10 minutes of crying.
It released 10 minutes of crying. That was like 1,000 hours of therapy. For sure.
Question. So a week before this, you have the experience at the retreat.
Right.
The men's weekend.
Right.
Where you also release a lot.
Yes.
The carpet therapy and everything
yes.
else. Crying as well?
Yes.
Right. Not something
I'm used to.
Not something you're trained.
I always projected this tough guy type. Growing up.
I'm not the victim.
I'm not the victim.
So do you recall going back now the difference between the carpet therapy and the psychedelic therapy, the 5-MeO? They both obviously were very healing. The carpet therapy you mentioned was preceded by breath work, which many say have a very similar effect to psychedelics. And my question is, for myself and for those listening, what was the difference between those two? What I'm trying to understand from you is, what did psychedelics allow you to heal and to access that even this very powerful experience you had with breath work and carpet therapy at an entire weekend, what did that allow you to access that the weekend didn't? What did the psychedelics allow you to access that the weekend?
Good question. One of the things that they say a lot about psychedelics is total ego dissolution. There's no ego involved. And there's stuff, when I did breath work, holotropic breath work, I went in there with certain intentions. There's certain things I feel like, okay, I release some pain. I feel some energy shifting throughout my body. It was great.
Oh,
10 times, 10 times better than what I experienced without doing it.
Right.
But the psychedelics took me to a whole different path. It's healing parts of me that I don't even know are there, that I forgot about. I mean, there are similarities with
breath work.
With breath work, for sure. But it's way more intense. It's,
right.
it's
But
more
understand
fast.
that for someone who's has questions around psychedelics or the stigma or the legality of it, or
Right.
the risks, health factors, everything else associated with it, and they do come with all of those things. What and breath work doesn't really.
Right,
I was told the worst that can happen from breath work is you might faint, but when you faint, you'll start breathing again.
right,
That's the worst. And it's never happened to me. I've done
Right.
many breathwork sessions. I've never fainted.
Same here. Never had a problem.
Right. So if you're talking about destigmatizing psychedelics, and I want to understand what it did for you that even breathwork couldn't do, you're saying it was more of the same, more powerful.
This particular psychedelic, because they're all different, the 5-MeO, it was like a stealth bomber. It's just a very quick path to healing, to releasing emotions. It was a 15-minute journey.
Understood. But even during that, you still recognized there was more.
Oh yeah.
What did
And
you do from
half, and I just want to say real quick, half the journey was me releasing emotions. The other half was a state of just oneness, and just I went through a stage of forgiving everyone who's done harm to me, and just loving everyone.
You blew way past victimhood,
Oh yeah.
but blew through
And
it.
I let go of anyone, any chains.
I know this may be a hard question to answer because a lot of people say that psychedelic experiences have no proper words to articulate them. How would you describe, if you could, if not, just let the question go, how would you describe the benefits of an ego dissolution state, or the benefits of, I guess it's the same thing as a feeling of oneness, right? The ego is what separates us. A feeling of oneness is that state of ego dissolution. How would you describe the benefits as it relates to healing?
As it relates to healing, I have a lot of examples, but how's it in the way it relates to healing?
Maybe don't add that to the question. How would you describe the benefits of that ego dissolution state of
Well,
oneness?
for myself, I was able to just have a lot of self-compassion for myself. I've never, before doing psychedelics and the men's workshop, I never had compassion for myself. I could have empathy for someone else, but not for myself. And as I had more compassion, empathy for myself, I was able to give more to others. And the same thing with, I'm sure we'll get into it, with the ketamine journeys.
So let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So I had 5 journeys at Neshama, great place. Worked with Dr. Radowitz.
Right, and how we met, I'm not sure if we mentioned earlier, is that you agreed to be filmed and in a documentary on
Yes.
ketamine. And
That's
that was shared with me. And I was impressed. I said, hey, this guy's willing to put one of those experiences on camera is a different level.
Right.
It's really putting yourself out there.
Yeah. At Neshama in Manhattan, it's a great place. The team's great. And it was a healing experience. I had a lot of turbulence on the journeys. There were people that would come in and out of the room to check on me.
So most of the time you're alone, and then
I'm alone listening to a playlist. I have a blindfold on in this reclining chair. And it's like a 45-minute journey.
and you did that
And you're
5
kind of
times.
unconscious. You're aware enough that if you had to get up and go to the restroom, you could press a red button and
Right.
someone will come walk you out. But most of the time, you're not even aware. You feel like you're in these different
Dimensions.
dimensions.
And the therapeutic benefits of being in these different dimensions.
It was also a release. There was a lot of turbulence. It was very tough, but I did release some emotions. They told me that I did cry.
Right. I think it's one of the misconceptions around breathwork and psychedelic therapy is that some people think it's the easy way out. But condensing 1,000 hours of therapy into 45 minutes or 15 minutes, it's not easy.
No.
It's a lot in a short period of time.
My ego was so strong, and the different parts of me, protectors of me, were so strong that they weren't letting anyone in. So it was all just intellectual. So I wasn't really able to make progress with traditional therapy. I think traditional therapy is great when you supplement it with psychedelics once you're already open.
Is it fair to say that you weren't able to make progress when you went as a teenager from being in prison to becoming an attorney to becoming a successful coach? And there was a lot of progress made through therapy and through the 12-step program that you mentioned, Beit Teshuvah.
I can say that now.
Right.
Because I'm on this journey. But if you ask me,
there was another level.
if you asked me a year ago, I would not accept that compliment.
What would you have
I
done
wouldn't
with it?
receive it.
You wouldn't receive it.
No. I would say it's not enough. I didn't do anything yet. Now I'm able to just have more compassion for myself, more empathy, and receive things.
The logical recognition that most of the people who have your life experiences are no longer living or are in prison, that didn't register.
It registered, but it was an intellectual.
Right.
It was in the mind. It wasn't connecting to the heart.
The whole life experience was in the mind.
Yeah.
This is I learned this in the 12 steps, is that I was numb. I was so numb coming into
That's it. Numb. Go ahead.
I was so numb coming into therapy, into 12 steps. There's still parts of me that are numb, right? There was a full, 360-degree numbness of me, and I'm still finding the parts that are still frozen.
Yeah.
But coming into therapy and 12 steps and all of that was the first time there's numb and there's a state beyond numb, because numb is a feeling. You can feel numb. And then there's a state beneath numb where you stop feeling numb. You don't even know there's this idea of numb. I was there. And through early years of therapy and EMDR and 12-step programs and starting to share my story, which is something I want to talk about with you, within those 12-step programs, and having a room full of people I can talk to, some of those feelings started coming out. And what I recognized is the feelings that I had frozen at a young age were clogging the pipes for all the feelings.
That's right.
There were no good feelings. There were no bad feelings. Mm-hmm. And that's what's, one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you is because one of the many reasons is that you're on the early stages of sharing your story.
Right.
You did one podcast on Common Denominator a
Right.
few months ago.
Right.
With Moshe Popak, which I had seen. And because it's early on in the process, you're very familiar with the lies we tell ourselves to avoid doing some of this work. And I thought it would be so helpful for people to hear someone who just a few months ago was on the other side of this and now is on this side saying, hey, I'm sharing my story. I'm talking about these things. I'm recognizing the numbness that existed, the feelings that I was no longer feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that took me a while to recognize for myself, is that I'd clog the pipe so much with those feelings under the guise of, which you remind me of now, I don't want to be a victim.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be a victim, so I'm not going to feel the negative feelings that I didn't have the capacity to feel as a child. And what it's doing is forcing me to live in a state of purely intellectual.
Right.
So I can tell you something like, dude, you're a hero. You've been through something that most people can't. And you're telling me a year ago that wouldn't have landed. That would be, okay, logically it makes sense, but it's not seeping into who I am. How is this stuff, this work you've done, especially in the last year or so, changed your coaching practice and who you're able to be for your clients?
Well, this work, after doing the ketamine journeys, I started working with different therapists, Devora Kamen, which she's great. I see how she works with me, and we talk about, some IFS stuff, different parts of ourself,
IFS, internal family systems.
Which I've studied a little bit. So how it helps me in my own practice is that I feel like I'm able to have more compassion, more empathy for my clients, and hold more space for them. And I'm trauma informed. I realize that they may not be taking certain actions because there's a certain healing that needs to happen that they're not even aware of.
And before you were missing that completely. Was it hustle culture for you? Was that what you were influenced by?
Explain, elaborate.
So hustle culture is, what are things I need to do to perform, at a higher level and do more and be more and, more, which is great because it's a hell of a lot better than being unproductive. But if we're stuck in trauma and we're just in that hustle culture, we're living 10% of our life, right? Neck up.
So really now I'm doing a lot of work with my clients where it's more of a holistic approach. And I believe that, what happens in your personal life is going to impact your professional life, and they're inseparable. So I'm able to connect the dots. And if I see signs of like past trauma, I'll share my experiences and just shed some light on that blind spot. And then maybe I'll refer them to a therapist to do deeper work.
Understood. Right. So now you're sharing that part of, right. And that way sharing the part of your experience where there were blocks within you that were holding you back from living your best life and saying, hey, that's going to be the same for you. Let me help you with that.
Yes. And many clients opened up to me after me sharing my ketamine documentary. They opened up to me much more. They were much more vulnerable with me, which deepened our relationship together.
Oh, that's correct. Meaning once they saw you real, they weren't putting you on a pedestal. They said, hey, here's a guy doing the work.
Right.
They can share with you as well.
And I don't know if we're going to get into this, but there's so much.
We'll get into wherever you go.
Fear. There was a lot of fear, if it's okay to pivot. There's a lot of fear with sharing the documentary. I had second thoughts. At first, I'm like, hell yeah, let's do it. I was pumped up. I'm like, I want to destigmatize psychedelics. There's so much healing that needs to happen in our community and other communities.
Our community meaning?
Jewish community, but also other communities.
Today, you're part of which community within the Jewish communities? You live where?
I live in Long Island. Yeah.
5 Towns area?
Yeah.
Got it. Understood. So within that community, you feel that there's healing that's needed, or in the broader Jewish community?
I would say broader Jewish
community. Okay.
I've had a lot of.
Do you feel like there's an added stigma around psychedelics within the Jewish community?
Hell yeah.
Attributable to what?
I don't know. I didn't grow up in the system, so you would probably have a lot more to say about this than me. I mean, I started getting more involved in the Jewish community back in 2006.
Right.
Before that, I wasn't really involved, so it was a slow process. So I don't really have a comment.
Yeah, there's certainly a stigma. Well, first of all, the stigma is certainly relaxing. That's what I'm seeing. We're a lot more. You know what it is? Obviously, there's going to be questions, just like you had, just like I had. We've all been influenced by the war on drugs, quote unquote,
Right.
and how these are bad for you, they're dangerous. It wasn't so long ago that Timothy Leary was called the most dangerous man in America for believing that psychedelics should be, part of the culture. And as a result, a lot of people within the religious community take what's there, that messaging that's already attached to it, and add a layer of religious question marks around it.
Right.
Is it okay from a religious perspective? However, what I'm finding is that within Judaism, there's such a strong value for life. It's embedded in everything. Everything can be violated almost everything can be violated in the name of Jewish life. Mm-hmm. Things like the Sabbath. If someone is sick, you don't question it. It would actually be a violation of the Sabbath if you weren't willing to drive someone to the hospital. Right. And as a result, as more people understand, and Jewish life is not just life or death. Jewish life is quality of life as well, in terms of, right, someone who's depressed. One rabbi told me, if someone is depressed, there's a form of death there.
Sure.
Poverty, extreme poverty, is considered a form of death. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a recognition that these problems are not just, first of all, it often does rise to the level of actual death between overdose and suicide and things like that. Mm-hmm. But even on a lesser level, things like depression and anxiety, or language that I've used a lot of is people who are sexually abused, often their childhood was robbed from them. In your story, your childhood was robbed from you, or there was something inside you that died during your childhood, more accurately. So using this language around it, I think there's an appreciation as the medical community catches up to some of what you're talking about within psychedelics, right? You're on the healing path for 15, 16 years, going to every seminar you can think of in therapy, and all of a sudden a few substances, 15 or 20 minutes, completely reorient your life and make you realize what's inside you and what's possible, and experience a oneness and an ego dissolution and all those things, and how transformational that can be, the self-compassion and accessing things that you didn't even know existed. When the medical community is talking about this, and informed rabbinical figures are hearing about this and understanding that, hey, this is recommended. Say ketamine, for example. There are people who've treatment-resistant depression who have been told that ketamine can help, and a doctor is saying that. So what I found is, while there's certainly stigma and there's certainly tons of questions, I'm not discounting that within the religious community, I'm also seeing massive leaps within it because of the fact that Judaism is so pro-life and so pro-quality of life in terms of, I don't mean it the material quality of life, so pro the fact that lesser quality of life is a form of death.
Sure.
And then saying, how can we improve that? I've seen it already moving pretty quickly, and expect it to move much more quicker. And really all someone needs, in my opinion, is the experience of it. So seeing someone who's been stuck, not the personal experience themselves, but seeing someone who's been stuck in a repeated pattern for many years, and then being able to free themselves from that pattern, whether it's drug addiction or depression or anxiety or the need for rehabs or all of those things, and suddenly it changes with psychedelic treatments. Experiencing that will put most people who are honest towards the side of, hey, there's a place for this. And you've spoken accurately and correctly towards the need for set and setting. It's not the same when we take ketamine at a festival or take MDMA at a festival versus when we do sessions with a therapist. Prepare, there's a set, there's a setting, there's an intention, there's someone you're integrating with, there's a dosage that's recommended.
Right.
There's a plan that's set forth versus using it in other ways.
I hope I did not give off the impression that taking psychedelics is a silver bullet. It's like a magic pill. It somewhat is like a magic pill, but there still has to be integration.
Right, and it doesn't Right. It doesn't seem to me that you're saying that because if I'm understanding correctly, you're still on the path.
I'm working with a therapist now,
Right.
creating self-awareness for myself. It's something I really teach a lot, which is emotional intelligence and self-awareness, being curious about my beliefs, my thoughts, my actions, integration, journaling, working with a therapist. So I'm
But
doing a lot of work outside of the psychedelic therapy.
for sure. And it sounds like just the opposite because prior to the breathwork session at this retreat, you didn't think you had trauma. So
Right.
the breathwork and the 5-MeO pointed you to the fact that there's more to work on. So it
Right.
didn't tell you, hey, take this, everything is perfect. It
Right.
said,
True.
there's some stuff that's not
Good
perfect.
point.
Now get to work.
Good point. Thanks. I'm glad I didn't give off that impression. So
I didn't get that impression.
Okay,
I'm not
good.
sure if certain listeners did as well. I want to focus on one more thing before we wrap up.
sure.
So you had mentioned wanting to destigmatize psychedelics, and that's one of your motivations for wanting to speak. And that wasn't actually one of the reasons that we had discussed before. It's kind of where the conversation went, and that's great. Everything happens the way it's meant to. What I want to focus on is telling your story specifically, the details of your story, because when you share it, it's clear that it's still difficult for you. Aspects of it, you've gotten emotional several times in this conversation itself. So it's a risk that you're taking to share these aspects of your story. What's compelling you to do
It's
that?
a big risk. I mean, from my limited view, I don't think it's going to be helpful for me professionally sharing this story, but I feel like
Which aspect of the story?
just dealing with psychedelics, number one, my past, I guess people can get past that. That was over 20 years ago, 25 years ago, going to jail. But
Have you
doing
lost clients because of the ketamine?
No one's ever come out and said that. I think I've only gotten positive feedback, but I think because I do a lot of corporate training and development on management topics, it could raise some eyebrows. They might think twice. But with my one-on-one clients, they're like, okay, that's cool. I think there's a certain amount of trust. It builds trust, but at the same time in my community. So I did say professionally, but also social circles, which I'm okay with. But there is a risk socially because my neighbors are probably not doing psychedelics. They're probably not into this work that I'm into.
Well, I thought my neighbors were not watching porn until I started talking about the fact that I
Okay,
had a porn addiction.
that's true.
So
Well
we'll
said.
find out what your neighbors are doing pretty soon.
Well said. But I'm not having conversations in my community about meaningful, real, authentic topics like this.
So you're only highlighting and enforcing the question. There's a risk. There's an
There's a
emotional
risk,
risk.
but the
potential
rewards are
business.
greater.
Right. So what is that? What's compelling you to share your story?
I had so many people reach out to me that knew my story one-on-one from just speaking to me one-on-one that gave them hope. I counsel a lot of teenagers just pro bono, just helping them out. I have a special place in my heart for kids at risk. I've spoken at public schools in East New York and
That's awesome.
kids all over. And it gives them hope. Like, wow, you're a guy, with this past, like, what does that say about me? There are people that want to commit suicide that after hearing my story, they thought twice after having a couple conversations with me. So I want to live a meaningful life. And I feel like it's my mission to help others grow. I'm a truth seeker. People aren't afraid to die. People are afraid to live. And part of living is being authentic and sharing yourself, being vulnerable, healing, working on yourself. That's living.
So if I may challenge that, all that's true, but you can be authentic without a microphone in front of you.
But then you're hidden. You're not, I guess I could share it one-on-one, but I can make more of an impact. Speaking to you, doing this recording, there's a much bigger impact.
So you feel like it's purpose and mission driven,
Yeah.
speaking. Recognizing the risk, understanding that there's a price to pay and not look at the not look, but not get pulled back from that.
There's no
the fee you
looking
may
back.
pay.
No looking back
Right
from
now
here.
it's out there.
I mean, after doing the interview and the Common Denominator podcast and releasing the Ketamine documentary and this,
Right.
there's no looking back. I'm here to shed light, on dark areas. So in my own life and also with the people in my circles.
To sheer light born from the darkness. It's the brightest light. So it's an honor to hear your story. An honor
Thank
to
you. It's
get
an
to
honor
know
to be
you.
here. First of all, I've been following your podcast for many months, and I love what you're doing. I feel like we're kindred spirits,
We both got a microphone in
and I
front of
got
us.
love for you just as a human being because of what you're doing, because you're living with purpose and a mission to make an impact, and you were vulnerable, and I'm sure parts of your story gave me permission to be more vulnerable. So thank you for that.
Appreciate that.
And you're releasing I've heard some of your talks, like you've shared some very vulnerable things. I'm like, wow. I left you a voice note, remember last week or 2 weeks ago? I'm like, Ellie, I love you. I can't believe you shared this on recording. This is amazing.
The
I'm
one
like,
with YY Jacobson where I spoke about the
yes,
porn slip.
the porn slip. And by the way, Rabbi YY is great.
Yeah, he's amazing.
He's amazing. So we need more spiritual
We
leaders
got to
like
get him on
him.
this couch.
Got to get him on this couch. And if Rabbi YY, you're hearing this, we need more people like you in the community to bring more meaning, more authenticity, more purpose to Judaism,
Amen. to
because
that.
it's really lacking right now. Thank you.
The Baal Shem Tov says when we see a problem, that's the sign that we can do something about it.
Good point.
Maybe more than could.
So we're
should.
doing something together.
Here we are. Thank you so much, Joey.
Thank you.
Awesome.